History, they say, is written by the victors. Yet, etched between the lines, hidden beneath the veneer of triumphalism, lies another narrative. This is a story written in blood, sweat, and tears. It is a tale of exploitation, a chronicle of greed, and a testament to the enduring legacy of colonialism. This is the story of the Blood Ledger. The Blood Ledger is not a physical document. It is a metaphorical account book, recording the immense human and material costs extracted by colonial powers over centuries. From the Americas to Africa, from Asia to Australia, the pages of this ledger are filled with stories of stolen lands, plundered resources, and exploited people. It is a ledger that remains tragically unbalanced, its debts still owed to those who were brutalized and dispossessed. This essay delves into the horrors recorded in the Blood Ledger. It examines the historical extraction of resources, labor, and lives by colonial powers. It explores the lasting impact of this exploitation on the world today. Ultimately, it calls for a reckoning, for a balancing of the Blood Ledger through reparative justice. For too long, the true cost of colonialism has been ignored. It is time to confront the past, acknowledge the present, and build a future where the debts of history are finally paid. The quest for gold and silver fueled the Spanish conquest of the Americas. Driven by avarice, conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro left a trail of devastation in their wake. Indigenous populations were decimated by disease, warfare, and forced labor. The quest for El Dorado, the mythical city of gold, became a symbol of colonial greed. The Spanish extracted vast quantities of gold and silver from mines like Potosi in Bolivia. Potosi, once the world's largest silver mine, became a symbol of both colonial wealth and indigenous suffering. The forced labor system, known as the Mita, resulted in the deaths of millions of indigenous people. The gold and silver plundered from the Americas enriched the Spanish crown and fueled Europe's burgeoning capitalist economies. However, this wealth came at an incalculable human cost: the decimation of indigenous populations, the destruction of their cultures, and the legacy of exploitation continue to haunt the Americas today. King Leopold II of Belgium's rule in the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908 stands as a chilling example of colonial brutality. Driven by a thirst for profit from ivory and rubber, Leopold's regime unleashed a reign of terror upon the Congolese people. To enforce rubber quotas, Leopold's agents employed horrific methods. Villages were held hostage, men, women, and children were tortured and mutilated, and mass executions were commonplace. The Force Publique, Leopold's private army, became notorious for its cruelty. They were known to sever the hands of villagers who failed to meet their rubber quotas. The human cost of Leopold's rule is staggering. Historians estimate that between 2 and 10 million Congolese people died during this period. The Congo's population was halved, and its economy was left in ruins. The scars of this brutal exploitation are still visible today. British rule in India, lasting nearly 2 centuries, resulted in a systematic drain of wealth from one of the world's richest countries. The British East India Company, initially a trading company, gradually gained control of India's political and economic systems. The British implemented policies designed to maximize revenue extraction. They imposed high taxes on Indian farmers, crippled local industries to promote British goods, and forced Indian farmers to grow cash crops like cotton and indigo instead of food crops. This led to widespread poverty and devastating famines. The economic value of the wealth drained from India is difficult to calculate, but undoubtedly enormous. Historians like Shashi Tharoor have argued that Britain owes India a massive debt. This debt is not just financial but also moral, reflecting the immense suffering inflicted upon the Indian people. Section 5. Echoes of Exploitation. The formal end of colonial rule did not mark the end of exploitation. The legacy of colonialism continues to cast a long shadow over the world today, manifesting in various forms of neo-colonialism and economic imperialism. Multinational corporations, often based in former colonial powers, continue to extract resources from developing countries at low costs. Unfair trade agreements and debt burdens imposed on developing nations perpetuate economic dependence on former colonial powers. Moreover, the environmental damage inflicted during the colonial era, such as deforestation and resource depletion, continues to have devastating consequences for many former colonies. Climate change, driven by the industrialization of the global north, disproportionately affects countries in the global south. Section 6. A Debt Unpaid. Quantifying the full extent of the debt owed to former colonies is a complex task. However, even a cursory examination of the historical record reveals the staggering scale of the theft. The stolen resources, the forced labor, and the lost economic opportunities represent trillions of dollars in today's money. Moreover, the human cost of colonialism is immeasurable. The millions who perished from disease, famine, and violence, the families torn apart, and the cultures destroyed represent a loss that cannot be quantified. This debt is not merely a historical artifact, it continues to accrue interest in the form of ongoing poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment in many former colonies. Ignoring this debt is not an act of neutrality, it is a perpetuation of the injustices of the past. Section 7. Repairing the breach. Addressing the legacy of colonialism and balancing the blood ledger requires a multifaceted approach that includes acknowledgement, apology, and concrete actions. Reparative justice must move beyond symbolic gestures and address the material consequences of historical injustices. Debt cancellation is a crucial step. Many developing countries remain burdened by debts incurred during the colonial era. Canceling these debts would free up resources for essential services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Land restitution is another essential aspect of reparative justice. Returning stolen lands to indigenous communities is not just about righting a historical wrong but also about empowering these communities to control their destinies. Section 8. A reckoning long overdue. Holding corporations accountable for their role in colonial and neo-colonial exploitation is crucial. Companies that profited from slavery, forced labor, and environmental destruction must be held responsible for their actions. This can take the form of financial reparations, public acknowledgments of wrongdoing, and commitments to ethical business practices. The movement for reparations is gaining momentum globally. From the Caribbean nations demanding reparations from European powers for slavery, to indigenous communities seeking the return of stolen lands, there is a growing recognition that the debts of the past must be addressed. Reparative justice is not about seeking revenge but about achieving a measure of justice for historical wrongs. It is about acknowledging the enduring legacy of colonialism and taking concrete steps to create a more equitable and just world. Section 9. Balancing the scales. The blood ledger stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of colonialism. Its pages are filled with stories of unimaginable suffering, greed, and injustice. For centuries, the debts recorded in this ledger have remained unpaid. The time has come to balance the scales. This is not a matter of charity, but a matter of justice. It is about recognizing the humanity of those who have been marginalized and exploited for centuries. It is about creating a world where the wealth of nations is not built on the backs of the oppressed. Balancing the blood ledger will require a fundamental shift in how we view the world, a shift away from the narratives of colonial dominance and towards a recognition of our shared humanity. It demands a commitment to justice, equality, and a future where the sins of the past are not forgotten, but are instead used as a catalyst for creating a more just and equitable world.